Hi, my name is Jamie Santano, and these are my parents, Dan and Lana Rodlie. Today we're going to make my grandparents' spaghetti sauce. It's a traditional recipe, and we start with tomatoes. So today I'm blanching a lot of tomatoes, 75 pounds of tomatoes to start with.
And I'll be chopping up the peppers and the celery and the onions. Our spaghetti sauce that my Nona made, because they were from northern Italy, it's not like what you get at the colander. There's a lot of vegetables in it, and they also used to put cayenne pepper and make it a little spicy, so it had a little bit of a bite to it when you had it. And depending on how free my mother was with the cayenne, sometimes it could be pretty spicy. My parents made this sauce when I was a kid. After my mother died, my dad continued to make the sauce. Jamie and her sister Tina certainly adopted the method and have continued to make the exact same sauce all through the years. I have gotten lazier in my old age and don't make it so much anymore, but we decided we were going to make a great big batch of it today and can it so that it's easier to just open up a jar and have it when you want it, because you got to cook the stuff all day. And we're also going to be doing today some Norwegian cabbage. I'll explain a little bit about that when I start putting it together. And we also got some fish from the, we got fish from Ferraros, but we also got some fish from the Yarrow Lakes. And you can get fish right out of this beautiful Columbia River, and you can can it. And I'm going to show you how to do pressure canning today, because the cabbage and the fish both have to be pressure canned. Well, the spaghetti sauce will have to be pressure canned too, but it'll be later in the day when we get to it. And so I just wanted to show you how to do that, because I know a lot of people are afraid of pressure canning, and really it's not to be afraid of. It's really an amazing way to preserve food. I make my own soup, I make stews, I make all kinds of sauces, vegetables. You have to pressure can vegetables, and the reason you have to do that is for low acid vegetables, you have to boil them to a higher degree than just 212 or 100 degrees water boiling, because it isn't enough to kill the bacteria. So therefore we pressure can, and that will bring the temperature up to a higher degree so it kills that bacteria. So that's why we do it with fish. And like I said, I do corn, I've done turnips, I've done every kind of vegetable.
And anything with meat.
And anything with meat and fish, you pretty well have to pressure can it. But anyway, today we're going to show you how we make this sauce. I'll show you a little bit more about the cabbage that I'm doing. It's a Norwegian recipe. My husband's Norwegian, and I got this recipe from an old Norwegian cookbook. When we go to Norway, they have this, you can buy this cabbage in a package, like you get rice in a package, you just dump it in boiling water, the whole pack, and heat it up. Well, they have surkål, it's called, in a package, and I just love this stuff. But it takes all day to make it. Like, you got to cut it all up, and it's got to cook a long, long time. And I thought, well, maybe there's a way I can can this so that when we're having our pork and we really want to have some surkål with it, all I got to do now is open a jar. So that's what I'm doing. So we'll just carry on now, and I'll explain a little bit more as we go.
So I am blanching the tomatoes. So what that means is to actually just take the skins off the tomatoes. So you put them in hot water, not boiling. I usually, what I do is I split the skin on the back, drop them in some hot water. Not everybody splits the skin. I do, because I find it just makes it just that much quicker and easier to get the skin off once they're, there we go. And then, yeah, because you don't want the skin in your sauce. It'll just, will make it skinny, I guess. Skinny in the wrong way. And when you make spaghetti sauce, you don't want skinny spaghetti sauce. You want all the fat in there too. So all puns intended. So I've got 25 pounds of the tomatoes blanched already here in the pot. One thing I should mention to you is that if you are blanching tomatoes, you don't want rings on your fingers. So I took off my rings just because the acid of the tomatoes, especially when you're doing this many tomatoes, it gets underneath those rings and it starts to burn so after a while. So because we're making this into sauce, I'm going to squish them all because you don't want big huge chunks of tomatoes in your sauce. So I just use my hands. If I was making like just a straight up tomato sauce, I would actually puree my tomatoes, but because we're making my Nona sauce, we are going to use my hands, and we like to keep it chunky. It's a chunky sauce. My granny's sauce, my mom's Nona she taught my granny, and then as she said, my grandpa made it too. We used to all show up on a Sunday, and like all of my friends when we were teenagers, like even when I was out of town, my friends would show up at my grandpa's house at 4:30, knowing they'd get to have some spaghetti for dinner. And as the sauce cooks, these will break down even more. And then I'll just keep blanching the rest of the 50 pounds. So normally I use a blanching pot to do this, but because I'm doing so many pounds of tomatoes, so a blanching pot looks just like a canning pot, except for, so it's a pot you fill with water, you put your tomatoes in here, or your peaches, and then blanch them in, pull it out, stick them in the cold water, fill the pot again, put it in. But with this many tomatoes at once, I just used the canning pot, and I'm just taking them out with a slotted spoon as I finish, because it's a lot of tomatoes. So I've blanched 75 pounds worth of tomatoes, which is a lot in one go. So I'm going to compost everything here. So basically, we don't throw anything away here. It all gets reused, whether it's fish heads going in the garden, or vegetable or fruit matter going into a compost. So I'm going to take this to the back of the compost. The worms love it back there. I bury it underneath their grass clippings because we don't want to attract bears. So yeah, I'm just going to do that now. So now that I've got this 75 pounds worth of tomatoes all blanched and ready to go, I'm going to start with the rest of the vegetables. So celery, green peppers, onions, garlic, and a bit of carrot. So just quickly chop. So I'm going to harvest some fresh herbs from the garden for the sauce. For our sauce, we use basil, oregano, thyme, and rosemary. So I'll be wandering through the garden. Here's some thyme. You can use dried herbs as well. The Italian seasoning is actually pretty good. But if you can use fresh, it just makes it taste nice, that's for sure. So we'll go over to the oregano, and then we'll get some rosemary. Okay, and now some fresh rosemary. I love fresh rosemary. I love the smell. I love the taste. It is probably my favorite. And there's a nice big fresh bowl of herbs, which we'll grind all up, clean and grind all up, make sure there's no bugs in there. Okay, so now I'm gonna start the sauce. We got the vegetables prepped, all the tomatoes are prepped. We have our giant pot on the stove here. So enough oil to just coat the bottom of the pot. I use Furrow Foods Calabrese sausages, and if I can't get them, which is I couldn't, I use Furrow Foods hot Italian sausages and remove them from the casings. I also don't drain the fat out of my sauce because it's where all the flavor is. I'm just going to start adding. There's the sizzle. Meat's coming from Furrows as well. This is sitting in the freezer. There.
What is that?
Oh, that's hamburger. So 4 pounds of beef and probably 3-ish of the sausages. I didn't even look. So I'm adding the vegetables now. I've just added the carrots And now I'm going to add the onions and peppers and celery as well. I don't add a lot of carrot compared to the onions and peppers and celery. You just want a bit of that carrot flavor. My grandpa used to actually just put in a whole carrot, and then he would take it out and eat it later. And we always liked that, to eat the carrot. So, and it was just to get the flavor of it in there. So I'm adding salt, not to taste, just to, as I said, to get the vegetables to sweat. It just helps bring out the water in the vegetables, is what I mean by sweating. I'm just draining some mushrooms. Just gonna add those. And garlic. Lots of garlic. So even though I'm adding fresh herbs in there, I also will add some Italian seasoning. I just prefer the Italian seasoning, which is just like dried oregano and rosemary and all the herbs dried. But beggars can't be choosers. This is like Clubhouse blend, so it's got, I don't know, a bunch of stuff in there. Kind of smells like poultry seasoning, which is kind of what you want. Similar spices. I don't measure anything ever, so I couldn't tell you how much goes in there. So now we're going to start adding tomatoes. The pot is just too big and too full to just dump in there. So I'm just, using a scoop. And now to stir it all up. And then I'll add tomato paste. Start putting in the tomato paste. I'm adding...
She's adding just a little bit.
For this big of a pot, I'm adding 2 tablespoons.
I never seen this before. I didn't know about this.
So then, if you watch, you can see and you can hear it.
Look at that foaming.
Yeah, so that is the baking soda reacting with the acid in the tomatoes. Just like if you were to make a kid's volcano with vinegar and baking soda. So you just stir it in and let it bubble down. And I find that by taking away a lot of the acidity from the tomatoes, it actually doesn't, you don't need to add as much salt even. You still got to add salt because you want that flavor, but and then we'll add the fresh herbs. Okay, all right, so now that I've taken out the acid, I'm going to add all the fresh herbs and salt. But there's oregano, basil, thyme, and fresh rosemary as well. And then salt. And you need salt. All right, let's give it a quick stir and give it a taste. We've added a little bit more salt. Let's see if it tastes good.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's good.
Well, now we're going to put it in some jars and pressure can it.
Okay, so then you're going to fill your jars. The one nice thing about doing this sauce in advance, it takes a long time. Like it cooked for a good 6 hours, and now the processing, you know, is an hour in the pressure canner. But you can grab this. Oh, that's a big chunk of tomato. You can grab this out of your canning cupboard, out of your pantry, and you have dinner. Company shows up, you're running late for work. Dinner's, you know, all you got to do is boil some pasta. you want to make lasagna and don't feel like making sauce, this is your sauce. With pressure canning, you don't actually need to sterilize the jars because when you pressure can, it's a much higher temperature, so it actually kills any and all bacteria. You want to clean off the tops of the jars because you want to make sure there's nothing blocking the seal. Right now my dad is, he put 2 quarts of water inside the pressure cooker, and he's putting the lid on. He's tightening down the lid so that the steam doesn't escape. Okay, so we've steamed this for 10 minutes. So now we're going to put the toggle down. So we stopped the steaming. So now as you steam it for 10 minutes, it won't go up to pressure. Once you put the pressure, the steamer down, now it goes up to pressure.
First thing you do, you have to take the pressure off just in case there was any. And if it was, you would hear it. Sometimes it creates a vacuum inside, so the air actually goes back inside there and then you basically take it, open it up. And there we go.
Wow, look at that, Dan.
So now, it's hot, so you can hear the air coming out from there. Okay, that's the first batch. And you see how it's bubbling, still cooking in there. All the air coming up, so traveling up here, and you see on the sides.
Okay, so this is Norwegian cabbage. It's called surkål, which in translated means sour cabbage. It's absolutely nothing like sauerkraut, however. It's like a sweet and sour kind of cabbage. Norwegians use it as a side dish for pork. It goes really nice with pork. So I got hooked on it the first time I went to Norway. Did I mention my husband's Norsk? Not to be confused with Swedish. He's not Swedish. Don't ever call him that. Anyway, this is very common over there. And I learned how to make it because I just loved it. But it takes a long time. You got to cut up all the cabbage, and then it's got to sit half the day cooking. And so when you were going to have pork and you had to cook all this cabbage up, it just took too long. So I thought, well, there's got to be a way I can it. So I just experimented with it a few years ago, and I canned it. And what I did was I used the processing time for cabbage. I thought, well, okay, so if you were just going to can plain cabbage, it would tell you how much to do, but you would have to pressure can it. So I put it together, and it does have butter in it, and they don't recommend that you have butter or oil in anything that you pressure can, but I have done that for the amount of butter that's in it and how it seeps into the cabbage during the cooking process. It hasn't been a problem, and I haven't had any of it go bad. I've been doing it for quite a few years now. We eat it. It keeps a couple of years on my shelf as we eat it, and it works out really, really well. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Norwegian cooking. As I said, Dan being Norwegian, I had to learn how to cook food for him because he didn't like pasta. So what was I going to do? He was also a sailor, worked on cargo ships, and one time I was with him on a cargo ship in New York, and we went into this, they call it the Norwegian Seamen's Church, and they are an organization where Norwegians who are out at sea all the time, I don't even know if it exists anymore, but they would look after the sailors when they came into port. So they would come out to the ship and take them shopping, or take them to places. And we went to this Norwegian Seamen's Church, and I got this cookbook, and the cover's kind of gone on it now, and it had all these Norwegian recipes translated. And I've never found one as good as this ever, because this is the down-home recipes that the women in Norway used. And so I was very excited to get the surkål recipe, which is, I can't find it right now, but it was this is where I got it from, was from this book. And every now and then, because I've been making this for like 40 years, it kind of gets away from me after a while. I start guessing, and just, it doesn't taste the same after a while. So every now and then I got to, reset myself and go back to the original recipe. And when I did that a couple of years ago, I found that I had been putting way too much vinegar in it. And so we went back to the original recipe, and it was way, way better. So now I'm just I can't remember where the heck it is in this book. Hold on. Okay, so here's the recipe. I'll read it out. It's surkål, or sour cabbage. So you use 1 medium-sized head of cabbage, 3 tablespoons of pork fat or butter. I use butter. 2 tablespoons of flour, a half a teaspoon caraway seeds, 1 to 2 teaspoons of salt, a half to 1 tablespoon of vinegar, a half to a tablespoon of sugar, and about a cup of water. So that's the recipe. And so I'm doubling this today because I had 2 fairly large cabbage, so I might make it a little bit more than that. In Norwegian cooking, they tend to layer everything. They put the fat on the bottom, and then they layer the vegetables and the meat or the fish or whatever. And I guess that was their form of slow cooker, because a lot of the recipes are like that. You don't stir it. You put it in there and you layer it, and then you put the liquid on the top and you let it sit. So we're going to put the butter in the bottom, and when it melted a little bit, and then we layer cabbage, flour, salt, caraway seeds. And cabbage, flour, salt, caraway seeds, do about 3 layers of that. And then we mix the sugar and the vinegar together with a bit of water, and just pour it down the side, put a lid on it, and let it go. Okay, we're going to use half a pound of butter because that's a double recipe. So I'm going to use potato flour. And this is because I have a Norwegian friend, who loves to eat this cabbage, but she's gluten-free, like she can't have any gluten, so I don't put flour in it in case I give her some. So potato flour actually works just as good. In fact, a lot of it is made with potato flour instead of regular flour, so you can use either. But if you're sensitive to gluten, you can use potato flour. I just need the butter to melt a bit here. Now the book says that we need a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of flour in the whole thing. So I usually measure it out, but I'm just gonna. So you sprinkle some of that on there, and then caraway. Caraway is a very popular spice in Norway. And as you can see, I'm measuring it carefully. A little bit of salt. More flour. More caraway. In Norway, they use vinegar, but it's not the same strength as what we use here. We have very, very weak vinegar. I got this from Norway, and it's 25%. There's even a warning on here saying, do not drink this without diluting it. So anyway, I'm only going to put a splash in here. I think the original recipe might have called for a stronger vinegar. But I remember one time making this in Norway. I made surkål one time for Dan's family, and his nephew, oh God, he nearly choked on it. I put the amount of vinegar I would put in if I was in Canada, not knowing that it was so much stronger. Well, oh my God, it melted the wax in your ears. It was so strong. So anyway, I'm just testing this. So that's better. Okay, so what I got in here is I've got the sugar, an equal amount of sugar and vinegar, although I put just a splash of the other stuff in there, and then about a cup of water, a little bit more. And then all we do with this is we're going to pour it down the side of the cabbage down here. So now we're going to load the cabbage into the jars. Generally, anything that's going in the pressure cooker, you want to leave about a 1/2 inch.
Okay.
I'm probably going to get a spoon or something to push that down. Another thing, check your rings. If they get rusty in here, or they're too, you know, if they're yucky, rusty, throw them away.
Recycle them, you know.
Yeah, recycle them or whatever, but these are all fine. But I go through my rings every now and then. Ouch! That dripped on me. It was hot.
Sorry.
Yeah, I go through them every now and then and throw away any that are getting too ragged.
2 quarts of water, and then we're gonna put the jars in. You have the bottom ring already in there, so it is not resting in the bottom.
45 minutes.
And it's gonna cook for 45 minutes.
At 10 pounds pressure.
Yeah.
So this is the cabbage ready, and it looks like they all sealed. Oh, look at this is what happens when you use butter. See, the butter has boiled out of it and is showing up in the bottom of the jar. Now, the risk with that is that they might not seal, but they all sealed. Okay, we're going to start on the fish, and I want to talk about jars first of all. We usually use pint jars. You can use smaller ones, but I like the ones that are kind of flat like this. You can use the ones that are taller, but I like these because they're easier to get the fish in because they're a nice size and they've got a wide mouth and they're just perfect for fish. So I save these flat jars. Also, these stack well in the canner because you can put 2 layers together in the canner when you're pressure canning. So they worked really, really well. The lids that you use are called wide mouth. That would be these ones, wide mouth lids. And yeah, so that's where we're at. So we'll be bringing out the fish and we'll show you what we do next. So one of the first things you have to do when you're canning, I mentioned sterilizing the jars. You make sure they're washed really well, and I just pour boiling water over them to sterilize them. However, if you're going to put them in the pressure canner, because the the temperature goes up way beyond the temperature of boiling water, you don't really need to pressure can them if you're going to, or you don't need to sterilize them if you pressure can, because they will be pressured and sterilized in this pot. But you do have to do the lids. So we put the lids just in boiling water or in water like that and bring them to a boil. This is to soften the rubber on them, and it makes them adhere to the jars a little bit better. We'll put them on to boil.
Okay, so now we're gonna prep some salmon here that we got at the store for canning. And before I brought them out here, I descaled them all. Just scrape them basically against the grain just to get the scale, because the skin is going to stay on the fish in the cooking process and it's going to be eaten later on. So we're basically going to cut off anything that is not going to be in the jar, obviously. And these pieces that we cut off here will then later be frozen and going to go into the garden. So we take them basically and freeze them in little bags. So we just continue on kind of cleaning up. So now we basically start cutting it up.
Leaving the bones in.
Yeah, the bone stays in. Now, some pieces are going to be a little big, so you're going to cut them up in smaller pieces. Then
what you do is you try to load them so that the skin is up against the outside if you can, and squish them down as much as you can. And again, you need about a half an inch above the jar, so you load them to about that level. Once these are canned, they're good for making salmon sandwiches. So as you can see, we're kind of doing this fairly fast. The fish is still quite cold, so you don't want to linger around too much. You want to get at it and do it quickly if you can. I will put a little bit of salt in, but I don't put a lot. I put like about a quarter of a teaspoon of salt in each jar. And then the other trick is a tablespoon of vinegar, and that's what softens the bones. You want to make sure in any canning that you do that you wipe the rims, because if there's anything there, it will prevent it from sealing. I like them on there tight. Okay, so now we add water to the pressure canner, and you need to have minimum 2 quarts of water. When I'm doing fish or anything that takes a lot longer, because fish is like 100 minutes, I put 2.5 quarts in there because it will boil down quite a bit, and you don't want it to boil dry. So then we put the jars in. So you just put them in. And one thing about a pressure canner, you can layer them, which is good, but you have to have a separator. So you saw that we did put there's a metal piece that goes in the bottom of that. You don't ever put jars on the bottom of a canner, any canner. You always have to have a rack, or some of them have a rack thing that you put in, or they have a metal plate that goes on the bottom. So you put your jars on the plate, and then you load the jars in there. And then we're going to put another rack on top of that, like that, and put the last 2 jars on top. So you see, you could put another full load in there, see? And then now we're going to turn it on and put the lid on. And this pot, being new, is a little tight, but not to worry, I think it's, and then you squish it together, and it's really got to be tight. Okay, and then you've got to make sure that the air valve is open. The steam is going to start coming out of that little hole there, and that's to get the pressure down, like to get some of the air out of the canner, and so it will start to steam, and it has to steam for 10 minutes. Now, any canner I've ever used, you always steam it for 10 minutes. It doesn't matter the size or how much or what you got in there. You steam it for 10 minutes, and then you will bring the gauge up. And I like to use the gauge. So we've got the pressure down to 0 now. So the first thing we do is we have to take the lid off it. And there's no steaming coming out, you see? So you don't want steam coming out of there. You want it totally down so there's no steam coming out when you take that lid off or open up the pressure or the thing there. So now we open this up. You got to be careful because it could be hot. Okay. There we go. I heard one pop.
So I got a big gloves so I can lift them out a bit.
The pop that you're hearing is the jar sealing. When the lid pops down on in here, this one, when it pops down, you'll hear a popping sound. So that's one way to know if they're sealed, but you'll be able to tell because there will be no bounce. But you don't play around with them when you first take them out of the canner. There's another pop. So you just leave them, and yeah, we always cover them and just let them sit until they cool. And you usually leave them until the next morning. I always leave them until the next day. And then I wash the jars in soapy water, take the rings off. You take the rings off to prevent them from going rusty, because they could actually rust and rust the lid, and then you've got spoiled stuff. So You take them off if you can. If you have to really pry them to get them off, then you don't do it. They should come off easy.